Real quick before I get into this video, there is going to be a live stream about an hour after this video goes up where me, Alex Hoops, and the editor and manager of both of my channels, Rudy, are going to discuss these top small forwards in the league and really do a tier list of every single small forward in the league. You know, the top small forwards conversation is just a part of it. But yeah, that is going to be fun. The last two have been fun. They've been our most successful streams by far. The chat has been super interactive. It's been a good time, so come through. But with that said, in today's video, I want to talk about Defensive Player of the Year and who will win the award in 2024. This is something that I do pretty much annually. It's a nice, reliable piece of off-season content because God knows nothing is going on. Man, the NBA cannot come back sooner. Anyways, with that said, let's talk about DPOY, and I put together a list of candidates, and I'm just going to list off all their names and then go down the list and explain each of their cases, why I mentioned them, and so on. So my picks for DPOY candidates is Evan Mobley, Giannis, Brook Lopez, but with a question mark next to it, Jaren Jackson Jr, Draymond Green, Rudy Gobert, Anthony Davis, Bam Adebayo, Nicholas Claxton, Joel Embiid, and yet another question mark next to Victor Wembanyama. So Evan Mobley is honestly my strongest pick for this award. He made a really good case for Defensive Player of the Year last year. As the season went along, he got some real hype to win the award to close the year, but unfortunately at that point, it had already kind of been decided and already been put in place that this was essentially a two-man race between Jaren Jackson Jr. and Brook Lopez. So with that being the situation, he ultimately was not going to win the award, but you know, with that momentum for an entire year rather than just coming in towards the end of the season, there's a good chance that he will walk away with the award, and I think he's primed to do it. He's one of the best, honestly, probably the best defensive prospect that I have seen. I think, period. I think that's it. Jaren Jackson Jr., ironically, is really the only other one that can compare, and Jaren was not as good of a defender out of the gate. He certainly was not competing for Defensive Player of the Year by year 2. So yeah, Evan Mobley I definitely think has a very strong case. Giannis is one of the best defenders in the league and will always be, and I do feel like Giannis is due for a little bit of a bounce back year. He obviously became super relevant in 2021 when he led the Bucks to a championship, but the last two postseasons have been disappointing. So I expect him to take this upcoming regular season fairly seriously and to really make a statement, make his name stand out again to people. And DPOY is definitely something that could be achieved in pursuit of that. I believe he was in DPOY voting pretty highly on those lists when he actually won his MVP, so I wouldn't even be surprised if Giannis was like an MVP and DPOY this year, because he's just a guy who can perpetually compete for that award. I put a question mark next to Brook Lopez because A, this season kind of felt like a miracle, and given just his age. B, well, I guess A and B are kind of the same thing. His age is what concerns me. I feel like the odds of him repeating what he did last year are not super high, and honestly last year was probably his one shot to actually win that award. I personally picked him over Jaren, but it was really by a slim margin. It was really a coin toss between the two. But Brook, being that he's older, I'm probably going to bet against him. Like he's older. Like he's an old NBA player at this point. Jaren Jackson Jr. is obviously the reigning DPOY. There's no reason to believe he cannot make a very strong case for winning it again, especially if the Grizzlies prove to be very successful when Ja Morant does not play due to his suspension. His defense would be a big catalyst in that, and that could definitely boost his chances quite a bit. But honestly, obviously he won it last year, so I don't know that he needs anything working in his favor to win Defensive Player of the Year. He just needs to do the same shit he did last year and then have no one else have a more impressive case. So yeah, he is very much in line for this award. Draymond Green, I think, is due to compete for this award again. I don't personally think he's going to win it. In fact, he probably wouldn't crack my top 2 at the very least. But he did have some rumblings for the award. If it wasn't last year, it was the year before. I think it was the year before he got hurt and missed a big chunk of the year, where he probably was going to win the award, but Marcus Smart ended up playing more games, so they gave it to him. So yeah, I do think he could be due. He's still one of the most impactful defenders in the league, and if the Warriors prove to be better than than a lot of people expect him to be given their poor season last year and a lot of questions around the Chris Paul addition, especially if he does play a lot of small ball 5, which is something that seems like a real prospect for the Warriors. Lots of opportunities to showcase how good of a defender he is. What could ultimately hurt him is that DPOY is often just kind of decided based on vibes. You know, there are a couple of guys who have a legitimate case for best defender in the NBA, and it almost feels like there's a coin toss from there. There's no consistency with the voting for DPOY. People complain about the consistency for voting of MVP, but I would argue the consistency of the application of all awards is pretty lacking, especially in the case of Defensive Player of the Year. Not last year. Marcus Smart's Defensive Player of the Year, that one really just felt like they flipped a coin and Marcus Smart got it. Rudy Gobert obviously has not been in DPOY conversations for the past 2 seasons, but I do feel pretty good about this Timberwolves season going into next year, and if defense is a big part of them being more successful than a lot of people expect them to be, he could get some buzz behind his name that isn't just people making fun of him for being French and starting COVID. Anthony Davis is a guy who's also perpetually in these conversations, and rightfully so. It really just comes down to, does he play enough games? Because I do think if he played like 70 games at his level, he would win DPOY. The problem is he rarely meets that threshold, and now award voting officially has an official threshold of 65 games played. 65 is achievable, but you know, he might go up against like a Jaren, for example, who might play 80 games, and then, you know, you're kind of shit out of luck there. But really, I think if AD does play a full healthy season and doesn't miss more than like 15 games, he could definitely make a very strong Defensive Player of the Year run. Bam Adebayo, I think, has a real shot to make this year his year. There's kind of a common trend with team gets a lot fucking better than they were before, and therefore people shower them with attention, and therefore player wins award. Like, for example, Kevin Garnett did not play his best defense in Boston. However, him going to Boston, that entire offseason, that huge ordeal, that ultimately garnered a lot of DPOY hype for Kevin Garnett, because there was this new exciting thing. He was what everyone was talking about, and then he was obviously kicking ass on defense. So as a result, he won DPOY that year. I know when AD went to the Lakers in 2020, there was a ton of hype for him to win DPOY, and they very nearly did it. And I do think that could definitely benefit him here. You know, assuming that they trade for Dame is the point that I'm getting at. Because I do think Dame, Jimmy, and Bam could legitimately be a 60+ win team. And something like that happens, if everyone's talking about the Heat as one of the top dogs in the league, and Bam is the guy basically carrying that defense outside of Jimmy Butler, ironically, then yeah, we're talking about a real shot. Nicholas Claxton from the Nets, I think, will have a real shot as well, especially because if the Nets do prove to be more successful than a lot of people think, it will end up being because of Nicholas Claxton's defense, and really the Nets defense at large. There's obviously a handful of really talented defensive players on that team, which might ultimately work against him, but he's a really, really damn impactful big man, and I think that'll be hard to ignore if, again, the Nets do actually prove to be better than some expect. Joel Embiid has statistically, from the advanced stat point of view, which is ironic considering how much his fans tend to hate those advanced stats, from the advanced stat point of view, he's one of the most impactful defenders in basketball. Ironically, the issue is everyone that's not him, because when it comes to Defensive Player of the Year, if you're going to win the award, oftentimes your team's defense needs to finish, you know, in the top 10 at the bare minimum, or like top 5 most of the time, and Philly consistently places, you know, close to top 10 or just inside the top 10, but they really don't get like a crushing dominant defense, and I do think you kind of need that aspect to where you have to have one of the 5 or so best defenses to have a really strong shot. If Embiid's not won it in the past while being an excellent defender, and his team ultimately ending up as like the 9th best defense in the league, and he's not going to do it now, so I doubt he's going to win it this time. And then I put Victor Wembanyama last. I don't think Wemby's going to win DPOY. I do think he has a chance to be in all defense conversations, and normally these are not the kind of projections I would put on a rookie whatsoever, because but ironically, you know, I talk about Evan Mobley being the best defensive prospect have seen. Well, Victor Wembanyama might be a better defensive prospect. I was really just referring to guys who I've seen in the league already. But Victor's a ridiculous defensive guy. I got the privilege of seeing him live in the summer league, and the degree in which the paint just no longer was an option for the opponent whenever he was on the floor is actually hilarious. Obviously, that's against summer league competition. I don't expect it to translate to that level of dominance in the NBA, but he should be a very impactful defender out of the gate, and there's a real chance he's like a top 10 defensive player in the league right out of the gate. With that said, I'm not going to bet on a rookie to win the award because I don't even know if that's ever happened. Has it? I mean, I probably should have looked that up, but I don't think so unless I'm missing some obvious example. I might be. I don't think so. I'm trying to think back, and no. With that said, if I were going to pick a top 3 out of this list in order, my pick, and then second place, third place, I'm going to go repeat DPOY for Jaren Jackson Jr. I'm going to go Evan Mobley, second place, and I am going to go Bam Adebayo, third place. Now, if the Heat miraculously don't trade for Damian Lillard, I'm probably instead going to go with Anthony Davis or Draymond Green. I'm going to say Anthony Davis between those two. But yeah, I do strongly feel that, as weird as this sounds, it's kind of the way that, narratives end up impacting the award. If Dame doesn't go to Miami, I'm not all that confident that Bam would win DPOY, but if he did, more eyes in Miami. There you go. So yeah, Jaren Jackson Jr. repeating his DPOY. I know it's not exactly the hottest take in the world to say that the reigning player wins it again, although it doesn't necessarily happen all that often. But Jaren, I think, is a generational defensive player. Obviously, you kind of have to be a defensive player of the year, but I think he's not only the type of guy who wins it once, I think he's the type of guy who wins it like 3 times plus. So yeah, he's very good. He's my DPOY pick, and that is it. Goodbye.